Hi. Hello.
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 Hello, hello, hello.
Welcome in, everybody. Um, Quick reminder that we want to hear from you as we do this. So please join in the conversation. We love to hear from folks. So tune in as we discuss our very delusional clients and leave comments. Um, which I love our inflammatory title. Let's just start with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are your are your clients delusional? Hi, Lisa. Good to see you. Comment, share, like all the good stuff. Awesome to see you, Lisa. Lisa's not going to be on the live today, but she's here in more than spirit. She's here in comment on Facebook.
We
So
miss you,
hello.
Lisa.
We miss you. We certainly do. Um, so we that's a big title. Your clients might be delusional. Um, what are we talking about when we say that? What do we mean? Let's begin here, shall we?
We're talking about self-awareness or the lack of any self-awareness that clients have or even people in general have, including the coach.
So
Just a general lack of self-awareness going on.
when I stumbled upon this topic, what was funny is I saw that Harvard Business Review article about lacking self-awareness. That random statistic that in a study, only 10 to 15 people were found to be um, really self-aware. And I was
10 to
like, well,
15% of people, not 10
yeah,
to 15 people.
thank you, thank you.
It's
I'm a
like
little,
there's only
little
10 people in the
tired,
world.
a little tired today. So
There's
sorry.
5 of them in this room right here.
Um, so so in reading that, what immediately went into my head was, wait, if our clients are not self-aware, and the basis and premise for coaching is that our clients know what is best for them, where does that leave us, right? So I thought it was a really interesting space to explore and do more research in. So I'm just going to open the floor. What did you guys find? What do you think about this?
It's interesting because that whole idea of that they know and the answers are are inside of them, that they, in many cases, they haven't been given the space to tap into it, to really examine self. So that self-awareness at that point, they're aware of the shell versus the deeper. And then an article that I read last week that became a big thing, the idea of the Solomon's paradox, that we talk about in training, that it's so easy for somebody to give another person advice on how to live their life when they have a problem, but when we're in the same problem, we don't take our own advice. And so what's that about in the same space of self-awareness? Why do we not see ourselves as authority when we can be authority for others? And what's that level of self-awareness about, of not trusting?
Part of it, I think, is the stakes are a lot lower, and you don't have your own skin in the game when you're giving advice to other people. It's very easy to tell people to do things when you don't have a stake in it, really. Um, which is why it's tempting for a lot of so-called coaches who are not ICF, educated, to just give advice, because advice is like something else that everybody has.
I would
What's
say
that?
I don't know if I can say on the live. I'm trying not to curse.
come on, it's getting late. 5 o'clock somewhere.
That's true.
I would say that also I think there's a portion of it where we sometimes develop tunnel vision, where we only see the things that we experience, and when it comes from an outside perspective, they're gathering a bit more information that we lack. So I think that's part of lack thereof awareness when it comes to self-awareness.
Lisa in the chat asked us to define self-awareness. I, of course, have a definition right here in front of me, but let's first define it for ourselves if we want to a little bit. What is self-awareness to you?
So I see it conflated with like self-consciousness. Like I'm self-conscious of. It's more of like I'm critiquing what I'm doing. I'm seeing myself as a like. I'm trying not to get too like weirdly philosophical right now, but there's like an I-thou relationship. Where, like, the thing I'm evaluating, I'm treating that like as an external object. So when I'm being self-critical or self-conscious, I'm treating myself as if I was a different individual that I have some third-party objective knowledge of. Whereas self-awareness seems to be I'm treating myself as the thing having an experience, like an I. So I'm aware of what I'm feeling. I'm aware of what I'm thinking. I'm aware of what I'm experiencing, and maybe trying to understand why it is I even have these experiences or feelings or thoughts. But I'm not treating myself as an other, where self-conscious people may tend to do. So that's kind of I'm seeing the mixing of the two. I'm seeing people, make being able to differentiate the two. I'm seeing people maybe only seeing one or the other. So there's a lot of different definitions that I'm seeing. I'm not really confident on just sticking with one for now.
What's interesting is one of the things you touched on right now is there is something, it's called the self-awareness paradox, or the self-absorption paradox, which is this sort of thing where the self-absorption paradox describes the contradictory association whereby higher levels of self-awareness are simultaneously associated with higher levels of psychological distress and well-being. um, which is interesting. It's that I think, though, again, what you sort of touched on is knowing the difference between being overly self-critical, overly introspective, overly where we're not considering sort of what's outside of us. And I think that's why that breaking it down into two levels of self-awareness comes out
Yeah.
in this, because we can be really internally self-aware, but then we are ignoring a whole world outside of us. So it's about finding a balance between the two, right?
I guess a more rigorous and maybe scientific way of thinking about it is that, like, how do we compare ourselves to animals? Like, animals don't know to some animals do, but most animals don't look in a mirror and think, that's me. They think that's a different thing. So there's an awareness of a self that is different from other people and other things around me. It's like the groundwork of self-awareness, knowing that I have individual thoughts and feelings, and I am not the same as other people.
If we're looking at it like weighted, like as if I am just aware of what's going on with me internally, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can be where that self-absorption comes in. We're not thinking about how I appear to others, and also how my thoughts and actions may affect others and affect the world around me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when I have that external self-awareness as well, we are able to find the balance between knowing how we appear on the outside and what our actions do in the world and how they affect others. And we can balance that with also, and hopefully find a common ground, or something that it works both internally and externally, where we are aware of how our actions affect us internally and also externally, and neither one is guiding our actions more than the other, essentially. And I think that balance is important, because truth of the matter is how we affect ourselves on the outside can very much affect outcomes in our life and things in our life, and not considering that or not being aware of that can be detrimental. Dan, I think you look like you want to say something.
Well, I think there also comes a play into this of recognition of a human being's ability to have bandwidth and how much bandwidth they have in awareness of, am I looking inside and do I take the majority of my bandwidth to go here? Or am I looking outside, putting my bandwidth on others? And when we put a majority in one direction or the other, what are we missing as a vacuum? And finding that space to really get quiet and go in. For me, self-awareness is really, it's like one of those mind twisting, bending Zen concepts that ultimately comes down to recognizing how little you actually know about self and about others, and getting
Which
out of the judgment that we think is out there.
I think that's an interesting that makes my thoughts begin to percolate, essentially, because sort of embracing how much we don't know, uh, falls right into that coaching realm, right? For us. As a coach. Now, as a client, it might be a different story, right? As a client, we don't love our clients to live in that I don't know anything space. So it's a weird dynamic there, right? What are your thoughts?
Live there is one thing, explore it is another. Because in that quadrant of what we know and what we don't know, there's two of what we know we don't know and what we don't know that are the areas for exploration to build and percolate up into the knowing.
I heard something today that when a client says, I don't know, that they're resisting their inner knowing. And I thought that was a really interesting thought. And how as a coach, it's okay if they're resisting their inner knowing. It's our job to be with them in that moment and guide them through that experience of resisting that and just letting that be okay. And then they'll be able to meet that inner wisdom through that space that we're holding. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the inverse could also be true sometimes with clients, where a strong assertion of knowing could just be a delusion on their part, and maybe not. From the perspective of a coach, I don't know if that's delusion, but in a realistic sense, their assertion of knowing is hiding the not knowing. Is an assertion of, it might be hiding an insecurity that they have, or they might not even have the self-awareness to even question the things that they supposedly know. But if they were maybe confronted by a coach's questioning or investigating or curiosity, under the surface, it might open a whole can of worms where they just don't know.
Can anybody else focus on anything but the kids?
That little playful cat is the cutest thing in the background. Oh my god.
I said the most insightful thing I've ever said on this live before. You guys can only focus on this damn kitten.
Well, at least it was recorded. Don't worry.
Totally ruined your big moment.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm just saying that the inverse is also true for a lot of clients.
Yes,
some clients who don't know, they might know some things, and clients who strongly assert that they do know, they probably know less.
But that's which I think a strong assertion either way is an assertion, right? It's a polarity. So when we're in that polarity, we're shutting ourselves down to a lot of things. And so I don't know is still an assertion, as far as I'm concerned, on the end of a spectrum, where I know is the same thing. So it's exploring that gray area and being willing to go there.
And there's so many different components of both of what you just said there, Brooke, and what Anthony shared. And particularly with what Anthony was saying, it ties into what we talk into in the 102 class on day one about attachment. Someone who is so locked in and so rigid on, I know this, are they attaching to a perspective that really isn't theirs, but the power's in it but it's an external because they're afraid to go inside. And then there's the levels of, and I talk about this in 102, when somebody says, I don't know, is it that they truly don't, which is a possibility? Is it that they're testing the waters because the last time they said that thing that they know, somebody shamed and judged them for it, so they don't feel safe yet? Or is it that they've never really looked into the well of resources inside and they're just not used to tapping that? So they're doing what instructors do when asked a question. They say, that's a really good question. It's the client's way of buying time so they're not sitting in an uncomfortable silence so that they can then tap into the resource inside to do the internal look.
It reminds me a bit of those moments in the lunch and learns when I do the coin toss, and we did the dice roll, where you've got people and I don't think that they're lacking in self-awareness, but we just sort of tap into that emotion of what they really want in that moment. We give them a way to do that by sort of putting the just forcing them to make a choice, right? So if somebody's waffling between something, what we'll do is flip a coin and say, okay, how did you feel about that? And a lot of times we're scared to admit how we feel or what that go into that internal awareness kind of moment. But when you are forced to make a decision, suddenly it becomes very clear sometimes what we want, what we don't want, and that self-awareness can become very powerful in those times when we're stuck in a place where we know we don't want to be there. We know it, right? Like, typically, or a direction we pushed into a place, forced somewhere. It becomes quickly apparent to us a lot of times what we don't and what we do want. Now, can that be true in a space where we have all the options in the world?
Paralysis by analysis.
Yeah. I mean, do we get stuck in a space where we aren't making decisions because we could do anything essentially, right?
Or people making decisions that they don't like, they end up not liking, regretting, and they're stuck in a cycle of they keep making the same decision and they don't know why. Why do I keep doing this? A lot of the clients I've worked with have voiced their displeasure at their own procrastination, that they keep not doing, or putting off things they would like to do, and they can't figure out exactly why they are doing that.
What's funny, I had a
Even
client,
though, yeah, go on.
I had a client that specifically came to me working on procrastination, and she was
Mhm.
like, I procrastinate and I don't know why. And it was, what's so funny is that a tremendous amount of our work ended up not being around getting her not to procrastinate, but her learning I guess the benefits and the power in her procrastination, like how that benefited her and why she did it, and sort of learning how to harness the skills of procrastination coupled with fixing or I guess flexing into spaces where the stresses that came from it were less so. But it became less about getting rid of procrastination and more about embracing the fact that there
Wow.
was a power in her procrastination. I thought that was, I mean, that was really cool work we did together.
There was the clients that I've sort of covered with on procrastination. They had a variety of different things. There wasn't exactly one reason. Like there's two that stick out in my mind is one that they wanted the goal, but they didn't like the methods they kept on sort of falling back to, so they kept on putting it off. The other person, as it turns out, they didn't have a lot of self-awareness in the beginning of the coaching relationship, but towards the end, they discovered, I don't even want this goal. This is not something that I even want to go with. So, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that the lack of self-awareness and the understanding of one's goals or desires, like it seems to kind of permeate a lot of coaching sessions. And it's not something that I feel all that comfortable with directly addressing the client, saying like, "Hey, you seem to not have a lot of self-awareness. What's going on with that?"
I
I
mean,
don't.
well,
It seems to come about in a roundabout way more often than just, I'm observing this as the coach and now I'm telling you.
I'm going to try to explain this, at least from my experience as a client, in a way that maybe, I don't know, it might not. I'm going to explain it in the way my brain, I guess, processes it. So when I go in to work on something in a coaching session, I feel like there are voids or like, black spots that I don't know or I don't see that I'm not aware of. Like there are things that are sort of, I mean, you could call them blocks. You can call them, for me, they're like voids. I think of them as voids. And I go into a session and I don't know exactly which of those voids are going to come up or where, but those are sort of, for me, as we're discussing this, I think those are areas where I'm lacking awareness. I'm lacking some kind of internal or external awareness, whether that be and it could be internal emotional awareness, it can be external awareness of process steps and things like that for me. But there's just this like blank spot that I want to explore and sort of make sense of. And I think that a lot of coaching sessions are very much built around, and this is me, could be completely wrong, but just my experience, built it around though exploring those places we don't have a lot of awareness, or there is a lacking in awareness. and going in and being okay with okay, I don't have it here. There are things I don't know. I don't know what is going on, and this might be why I don't know comes up so often in coaching, because we've been telling ourselves that, but the truth of the matter is we're going into a coaching session with the intention, at least for me, a lot of times, of exploring what I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to slightly challenge one sentence there, if I may,
Mhm.
because I hear a lot the idea of we tell ourselves we don't know. Long before we told ourselves we don't know, somebody told us we don't know. And we started buying into that external perspective, particularly probably coming from parents
Mm.
of telling us when we're kids, you don't know what you're doing. And then we see this figure of authority telling us we're stupid. And we start to own that for self, which might also be where the Solomon's paradox comes in. We don't take ourselves as figures of authority in our own life. Learned that in my hypnotherapy training. And it's about really the work of coaching and the work of all the helping professions is to reawaken the self to being the authority in your own life.
Mm.
I will say too, when I say I don't know, I don't have a emotional attachment to it. I guess you could say I'm okay
Mhm.
with not. I'm aware. There's a lot I don't know. What is the Aristotle quote? The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yep.
And I have a keen awareness that I know very little, and I'm okay. Like I'm good with that. I think it's very exciting to learn more, and that's why I love filling in the spaces I don't know and going into a coaching session and having the opportunity to explore the things I don't know. And do so in a safe space where I'm not going to be called an idiot, or I'm not going to be told my ideas are wrong, or I'm not going to be, that's the beauty of the coaching container, is I can go in and not know and learn what I really do know, and learn that I do know probably quite a bit. And it's something maybe that I just haven't made time to explore about knowing it. But I probably do have the answers, right? I probably have a lot in there, and there's probably more about it than I actually am admitting to knowing, but I haven't put the pieces together yet. The
Mhm.
nonlinear brain, they're just floating all over in a million places. I haven't assembled them into a way that I can make sense of them. I guess you could say.
Lisa brought something up like earlier when you were talking about, she's talked about the blind spots and that you feel like there was a mixed metaphor of blind and also a void. And I feel like those two aspects are important for self-awareness, because let's say there's a blind spot, you could open your eyes, you can, shine a light on it, you can be made aware of something that you just weren't before, and now you can actually start to process it. But a void brings to mind like it's asking you to see out of your elbow. Like, what is closing your eyes is different than the experience of seeing out of your elbow. Like, one you can't think about or even possibly do. I I suspect there's aspects of self-awareness that are not possible unless a third party is there to sort of tell you or help you through this, which I think what part of being a coach, or maybe even other types of professionals like a therapist or a counselor might be able to do. Um, Similar to that test that we all took, where you take a self-examined test about your self-awareness, but someone else has to take the test for you, about you. So I took a test about Brooke and how I perceived her, and the results of that test and the self-awareness of that was influenced by something that Brooke can't even really perceive because it's through my own perception of her. So what I'm getting at is I think self-awareness has a limit. There's a definite black hole or void where it can only go so far. To go the extra mile, you need another person or another observer to start giving their own input.
And I would even say beyond, it goes beyond that. I think it has to also at some point be okay, becoming okay with not knowing, right? With being okay with not having all the answers, being okay with not just
Or
sort of, I think being able to just know that you can adapt, or know it becomes so much more than, I think we get into a really controlling space when we go, okay, I'm going to know everything about self. I'm going to know everything about how I can affect. I'm going to have control of this. And I don't know, for me, and this again might be my interpretation, or the peace comes with I guess knowing I'm doing my best, or knowing I'm being as self-aware as I can and as externally self-aware as I can, and just being okay with that, right? But I think about like myself when I was 18 years old, 20 years old. I know my head from a hole in the ground when I look back at it, right? And I thought boy, was I egotistical, and did I think that I was self-aware and I knew my shit, right? And I'm such a much more humble person now than I was back then. And I think that the humble me who doesn't know is so much more capable of being aware, and that comes from being comfortable and not knowing, which I think is something Dan said early on. Um, Very powerful. This whole topic's very powerful to me.
And even
So
as we think about like that phase of life that we all go through in probably like mid-teens through even into our late 20s, early 30s, of really kind of finding our sense of self and declaring who we are, we start to take on that I know more than everybody else who's been on the planet. And it's not, it's a generational thing. Every generation goes through it, but I think it's very much a part of kind of finding out who we are and beginning from maybe a rigid place, creating that sense of evolving self to create some flexibility of, okay, maybe I don't know, maybe I don't know as much as what I think I do, and continue growing forward. But
I do. I
until we
will.
put that flag down or put that pole in the ground, we're just kind of wavering.
Mhm.
I will say a lot of clarity does. And what was interesting about that quiz is it talked about values and things like that. And I think that I have clarified values for me better as an adult than I did when I was younger, for sure. Like I know through experience what is important to me and what is less important to me, and and whatever that may be. And I don't know, I think it was more idealistic when I was younger and less from a place of actual experience. Uh it's just interesting like that. It just brings me to a whole thing. If you're looking at yourself from prior to self now, um
Yeah.
that's also humbling,
Yeah.
because I'm like, I think I know now, but in 20 years I might feel like I knew nothing. Who knows? Right.
The worst are Facebook status, like from like 10, 15 years ago, I see, and I'm like,
Right.
oh my God,
Those,
I can't believe that's me.
right. I hate those notifications. Like, this is what you put. I'm like, oh, what?
I had no self-awareness. I thought people cared about my workout routine, what I ate, how good I felt about myself, like all these weird things I was posting clearly for my own validation. Yeah, no self-awareness when I was young.
um, uh, so bringing this back into the coaching container and the coaching space, uh, what if we have clients that don't have a lot of self-awareness, right? I mean, how could that show up in coaching for the client?
Lack of clarity of goals, where they like, I for some reason I thought about like how coaches, like we talk about niching down your coaching, career. I think about clients niching down their goals. Like their goal is, I want to be happy, I want to feel satisfied, I want to be fulfilled, and not really having a good idea what that means to them, and where does that even maybe feeling of discontent come from, where they're not at that place they want to be. um, and
Yeah.
in the conversation, you start to ask questions that maybe they've never considered themselves, and it takes them to places they didn't think the coaching session would go,
Right.
originally.
My brain went to like a lack of satisfaction in successes, like a lack of feeling like, they accomplish something and they come in and they don't feel satisfaction from it, right? They're like, it doesn't resonate with them.
Which
Um,
leads me to like an unawareness of what even leads them to satisfaction, and what are the things that truly bring happiness and joy and those feelings of success to their life, because they've never done the self-examination to define it. Then it really doesn't matter what you're doing. If it's not bringing satisfaction, it'll just fall off the side.
I really love this space too because it's such a present space. Like it's such a it allows for it's not we're not it doesn't have to be wise a lot. I mean, we can have those why moments, but we can work in spaces of finding satisfaction moving forward, figuring out what that means and how to attain. And this is all forward moving work that is so powerful, really, really powerful. And I love that this is where coaches land, and this is the space that we get to work in and land in. Because I can explore my why, all day, but where does that get me at the end of the day if I'm not looking forward? And applying it practically. And I think that's this is a very powerful space. What any other spaces you think that self-awareness or lack of self-awareness might show up in
I think this is less likely. We've talked about these sort of spaces, and these are maybe neurotypical types of people we might run into in coaching that maybe aren't diagnosed. Maybe they should see a therapist instead. Like I'm thinking narcissistic personalities, like the dark triad stuff, people whose brains are functionally different than the average person, I would say. And there's a lack of self-awareness in how to maybe act in social situations or in relation to other people. I'm thinking of this is like when they first started like working for CLCI and coaching. A friend of my mother's wanted me to like coach with her son who had autism and had difficulty relating to people. Now, obviously, I didn't coach this person because I'm not equipped to, give therapy or help to somebody who's neurodivergent. But a lack of awareness in terms of other people and social relationships might be something you encounter that's undiagnosed in someone, because that's the way they are, that's the way they were born, and I don't know if a coach can really assist with that without maybe the proper training or maybe a certain background. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts?
I would say if they're undiagnosed, yes, maybe. But if it's somebody who's working with a diagnosis and it's a coach that works in that space and it's about moving forward with that person to work on those very specific things, absolutely a coach.
Well, I'm even going as far as like undiagnosed, and objectively speaking, they're undiagnosed, but neither the coach nor the person you're coaching knows that.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, we know when those referral moments come up. I'm totally dismissing you right now. When you were sharing, something did come up. Came up to me, like something popped into my head, and I think that this taps into more of that ECC, MCC level coaching. When I share this, when we have a client that is saying one thing and behaving another way, like I am this, but you as a coach have seen through continuous sessions, you've got a history there, and they are saying one thing but very clearly doing something else, right? And this is a moment where as a coach we make an observation, right? Dan.
Call the pattern to the room. Be aware of the larger patterns influencing their life that they might not be aware of until we notice them and either call them out in the single conversation or across many, because that could be the missing thing in the awareness. They're immersed in it day to day, and we tend not to notice those things. But then once the bigger lens comes on of here's these things that are repeating over time, repeating in the words you're saying, repeating in the doing or not doing, what's that all mean, really opens up that deeper level of who we're being.
And I think that is important to make those observations as a coach, right? It's important for us to go, I hear you, what you're saying, but what I've observed is this. But also being aware that in that moment, the client may not be ready for that awareness or able to fully process it. And it might be something that ruminates, right, over time. and then it comes back, you circle back to it. How do you
Mhm.
approach assisting and giving awareness in that kind of situation? I mean, what is the best way?
I can give you an example of how somebody did it to me.
Okay.
So when I was going through my PCC mentoring, I had given before our first session, I had given my mentor 2 calls, 30 minutes each. She listened to them, she broke them down. We start the conversation and she's talking through it because everybody in this room knows how arrogant I am about what I do. And I'm like, I don't need this. Just rubber stamp me. And she's like, so yeah, ACC level, you're really good. PCC level, yeah, not so much. And that's what we're here to do these 10 hours for. And this is 3 years ago. So she's talking to me about she notices a pattern in 2 30-minute calls and says, so I'm noticing that when you ask your client about where they're at, they'll give you the story of where they're stuck. You ask them where they want to go, they'll give you this story of what they want to dream into and what they want to create. You spend a whole lot of time exploring their stuck point and getting an understanding of that. You don't spend so much time out here in the creation. I wonder what that's about. And I just like sat there for a minute and I started bawling my eyes out. And I'm crying, sobbing through tears, saying, it's because when I was a kid, I was never allowed to be happy. And every time I was, it was taken away from me. And so that experience in me, I was projecting in how I was holding the seat for somebody that subconsciously or at some level of I was aware that when I was out there, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop because it would, even though I can tell everybody else there is no other shoe and there's not one that's going to drop. It was still showing up in my processing of holding space for somebody until somebody said, I'm noticing this pattern. What's it mean? And now it's
That's
like, oh yeah.
that's really okay. So don't let's hold that for a second because I have 2 questions in that space. So my first one is well, one I guess is an observation. That's really cool, the filling in that blank, right? And bringing that awareness around it. As a coach, how did you make sure to break that pattern?
I started leaning into, so the pendulum had swung this way. I was consciously swinging the pendulum the other way to spend more time out here so that then I could strengthen this muscle as well, that at any point then I wasn't leaning on one muscle too much. I could create the flow of being where the client needed to be and really ask them what's most important to you. It's like going to the gym. If you only ever do curls, your biceps are not going to be compensated. You've got to work the other one too.
Yeah. Anthony, I
So
see you
and
thinking.
that yeah, so it seems from that example, it's a self-conscious application to I'm I'm aware of this now. I have this awareness that is present. Now I'm being self-conscious in applying concerted effort to correct, an imbalance
Yep,
that is
it comes
happening.
front of brain and then it slowly percolates back into a more
Mhm.
flexible habit.
And all that just by, making as a coach or the mentor in situation, making an observation, and asking, where does this come from?
And that's one of those things where we put coaching in a box sometimes and say, it's asking questions and moving forward and all these things, but the most powerful moments often come from when we make a powerful observation, right?
Mhm.
um a simple powerful observation, and then that's like oh brings that self-awareness can be so powerful that I
Mhm.
But
have been doing this is
here's here's sort of a maybe a little, I guess I can't think of the word, a little worm in this sort of problem is that Dan had at least enough self awareness to recall that about himself and then connect the dots. I'm not exactly sure every person or every client can do that. There might be some people where it's like, I don't know why I do this. There's something about me that I don't like. And I see that you see that there's a connection. I don't know what is causing this. And that's causing a lot of, stress.
I think Dan and I are going to go the same places. Dan.
You go first, and then I'll
No,
go.
you go.
So, yes, my level of self awareness cracked it open in that moment. Someone else who hasn't gone inside as much
Mhm.
it's not our job in the coach's chair to crack them open in that hour. We can open the door. They're going to walk through it when they're ready.
Mhm.
But if we don't open the door and ask the question, the door never opens for them to expand into the self-awareness.
And that's why I had mentioned when I said this that be aware that in that moment the client may not be in a space to come to that awareness. It might be something that happens over time or outside of the that session, where they are when they're able to sort of process it and think about it and go through it and go, oh, that was right. Oh, this is why. Oh my goodness. And then that work will start to happen. It may not happen in that hour, just like Dan said,
Mhm.
but making
That might
that
be something important though for the viewers then. Like we talk about generating self-awareness. You're probably not going to see the fruits of your efforts as a coach in the session. It could be, years after the fact and the accumulated experiences, you're done with the whole coaching relationship and then something might happen. So it's kind of important to be aware these could have long-lasting effects on the person.
I hope it does.
Yeah.
I hope it's long lasting, right?
I-
I hope that these changes ruminate and take time and grow, and we're planting seeds.
I want to say that this is similar. I know coaches don't give advice, but this is similar to when you're younger and your parents do give you a piece of advice. It doesn't click in until you're actually in a scenario where it matters to you, where you're at a point in your life where you do understand that situation to the point where that advice finally lines up in that specific scenario for you to completely be aware of what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And then you're telling yourself, dang it, I'm becoming my parents. But
Well, that's of course if you had great parents or good parents giving good advice.
yes,
If you had
of course,
horrible
of
parents
course.
giving bad advice, it might never
Yeah.
click. No, I'm just kidding. We know Dro has wonderful parents.
I do.
That's true though. I find myself quoting my dad all the time something I did not do when I was younger. So but definitely, I mean, that's one of the things where the seeds we sow may not we may not see the flower until much further down the road. It might just be little things. It might be and it's going to come from more than just an observation too. There's more to it. The client is going to have to put things to practice and experience it and go out there and do, and then it'll grow from there and grow from there and grow from there. I do feel as though that we as coaches are sort of I guess arbiters of awareness.
I like that.
We are we create I guess spaces that allow for people to become more aware of themselves and what's going on. And it does for me, and this is might be a little bit of a bratty or indulgent or something along those lines, say to me, we as coaches shouldn't be surprised when folks who aren't in a place that they want to find awareness don't receive what we offer well, right?
Mhm.
There when you get that headbutt about what thing people are doing in coaching, it might not be for a place for us to get insecure or defensive. It might just be that the person that we're talking to or that space isn't ready for self-awareness yet, isn't in a space that they're ready to grow or learn. And it's scary when you're facing somebody who might bring awareness to your actions. Have you ever experienced that where you would rather be unaware?
I'm of the opinion that self-awareness by itself is neither a good or bad thing, but it could be a bad thing. Like it could lead to dark places that maybe a person can't or doesn't get out of. That's not really on you as the coach or really anybody else except for them, but it's not always a good thing. There could be underlying things that might need to be addressed by further professionals. And being self-awareness is kind of like it's like a labyrinth you can get lost in sometimes, like depending on how introspective you get and maybe how hard of a life you've had. It could lead to not so good places.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that as you're sharing, I'm thinking yes and no, because I would hope that in the exploration of self-awareness, you're not doing it indulgently. You're not doing it to beat yourself up. You're not doing it to with the intention of indulging destructive thoughts and behavior, right? I am aware of my destruction. I don't care. Here I go, right? That's a whole different thing. I would hope then
True. But
I guess so it's like it's an intention.
I have known people like that in real life who I know I am like, who will say, I know I'm like this. This is why I'm like this. I'm going to continue doing things that are harmful to myself and society
I think
ultimately.
that's
But
also a big sign of lack of awareness, though, because they're saying this is why I'm like this. What they're also saying at the same time is I'm not capable of being anything else.
Because it's caught up in their identity of that's who they believe they are.
And that's the space that they're unwilling to explore or unable to explore yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Eventually, hopefully, in the perfect world, not always perfect world, though, in reality, we always hope for those people that they come to a place where they're ready to learn how to do things differently. Right?
And I think that's very much the experience I was in about 10 years ago. As you asked that question, is there a moment when you didn't want to be or when you don't want to be self-aware? And I think back to about the year and a half before I asked my first wife for a divorce. I didn't want to be I didn't want to be as aware of how miserable I was, because once I became aware that I wanted to be out, it was going to have a number of dominoes fall, not just for me, but for others around. And I didn't want the responsibility on that. And it took a year and a half or so to really come to it. If I got to do it anyway.
We're just not ready for that, right? I mean, I think there have been moments where I've definitely filed things away. I've been like, okay, I can just exist in this sort of state of like whatever, like live with this right now because I'm not ready to go and dive into that awareness things. And I think that's okay. I think that's healthy. I think of it like meditation. Like if you're meditating and there's a giant noise outside, you've got to learn how to push that out so you can do this right here, right now. And I think that is a metaphor for being able to go through life. There's times where we have to just sort of set things here so that we can function and not get into that awareness level yet.
I've got an example where I agree. I think on a smaller scale, it's very healthy. I think eventually you've got to do some addressing. But on a smaller scale, one example I have that came up is when I was younger, way back when, fresh out of college. I was on my way to an interview and I got stopped by a cop for a click a ticket. And I didn't even look at the ticket, what it was going to cost or anything like that, because I knew I had an interview in the next 10, 15 minutes that I was already going to be running late to because of the cop stopping me. So I just kind of put it to the wayside. And then, my self-awareness, I put that on level 0 for that, just to try and get it out of my mind so I can focus on that interview. But eventually, obviously, I had to address it. I had to look at the ticket. I had to become self-aware of what steps it was going to take to go ahead and make sure that ticket was taken care of. So eventually, I think, yes, you definitely have to, on a bigger scale, address it. But in small instances like that, I think it's very healthy, and it should be something that you take advantage of in your life.
I think to Anthony's point earlier, it becomes a problem. We know that we all experience anxiety. We all experience stress. We all experience moments of delusion, right, in our lives. But when we know that when it becomes a problem, when it becomes a referring out situation, when it becomes a psychological issue, is when we cannot function in life anymore. When it's affecting our day-to-day lives in such a way that is detrimental to our success as a human being. So that's when we go, oh no, something's really wrong. I need to see a therapist, a psychiatrist, etc., because now I can't function in the real world. And so I think we can, like Anthony was saying, we could fall into this space of all I'm doing is ruminating internally and introspectively and becoming so aware, or all I'm doing is pleasing externally, and I'm so externally aware that it becomes detrimental to our own success as human beings. And at that point, yes, it's probably a problem. You probably should see somebody. It might be a referring out situation. But a healthy human being can find the ability to become aware when it's right, set it to the side when it's not, and sort of maneuver through life. I think, as people are remarkably capable of moving through things, I think, more than we give ourselves credit for, and turning that awareness up and down so that we can get through the day-to-day things that we've got to do, right? Final thoughts, guys. We're almost done.
That flew by.
No.
I know nothing.
Amen.
It's good.
I think we know more about ourselves than we like to give ourselves credit for. But I think what when it comes to self-awareness, like we were speaking, it is a combination of internal and external awareness. I think what we lack, a lot of us, is that external awareness as far as how we do interact with those around us and the goals that we have, and for ourselves. We do lack that external awareness and how we kind of move to get to those points. And it's really, again, this is where I think coaching is amazing, because you do have that person that's not necessarily, I know that always sounds like a taboo word, but challenging you in a way to assist you in getting to that level of awareness, to get to a point where you are both internally and externally self-aware.
I think mine's sort of an extension on Jerome's. I think there's a hard limit on how self-aware you can be and it still be beneficial to you, which is why other people help do the work that you can't do. They provide an insight as to who you are and your actions, combined with your own self-awareness to create a whole person. So that's my final thought.
Everybody show their kitties.
Mine all ran away. They were here earlier. Jen, final thoughts?
The more awareness I gain about myself, the less I realize I know. I mean, we said it earlier. It's like the more I learn, the less I realize I know. And I actually love that feeling. It's kind of amazing.
I hold on to, like, now, I used to hold on to, like, I used to think I knew how things worked and people worked and all of these things, and I don't anymore at all. I hold on to very simple things, and I think that's where that feeling of values comes in. I hold on to little things that are important to me. So I'll hold on to honesty. I'll hold on to consistency. I'll hold on to the feeling of I guess trying my best in the best way I can, right? And just being honest through the process. And that, for me, it's like I break it down to simple values for me, and just attempting to live by those, and accepting that I know really nothing outside of that, right? And that's okay. That's totally fine. It's very peaceful. I used to feel like I was trying to strangle the world into existence, like into a way I wanted, like just trying to squeeze it there. And there was so much turmoil that came with that, and the embracing that I don't know, and being willing to be self-aware and know how my actions, what they do and how they may affect others and myself. It's a very powerful tool, but I also accept that there are a lot of things I know nothing about, and there's peace in that.
Yeah.
That's like my that sums up my belief in like my in the universe and God, or whatever you may call it. Is I find tremendous comfort in that I know nothing. Truthfully, that's my like spiritual basis. So and I think that's our time. So yeah.
Hope you enjoyed the cat show today. We've had 3 guest stars.
My favorite is the one behind Auntie. At least what he was doing. I didn't think I was going to make it through the first 15 minutes of the live.
It's
'cause
just very
I thought I was
naughty.
going to have to turn off my screen and laugh.
Very naughty kitty.
All right.
All right,
Should
we'll see
Rename
you
that one of your
guys.
cats Delusional.
They are.
We will
They're-
see you guys next week. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, take our classes, become more self-aware through Coaching 101 and Coaching 102.
Bye.
See you guys next week.
Bye.